The Negro Celebrity, the murder of Malcolm X, the exile of Robert F. Williams, who was forced to flee to Cuba with the combined terrors of the FBI and the minions of Southern justice snapping at his heels, and the exile of the late W.E.B. Du Bois, who, in the sunset of a valiant life, made 3 symbolic gestures as a final legacy to his people: renouncing his American citizenship, returning to Africa to become a citizen of Ghana, and cursing capitalism while extolling communism as the hope of the future. These events on the one hand, and on the other hand, the award of a Nobel Peace Prize to Martin Luther King, and the inflation of his image to that of an international hero, bear witness to the historical fact that the only Negro Americans allowed to attain national or international fame have been the puppets and lackeys of the white power structure, and entertainers and athletes. One tactic by which the rulers of America have kept the bemused millions of Negroes in optimum subjugation has been a conscious, systematic emasculation of Negro leadership. Through an elaborate system of sanctions, rewards, penalties, and persecutions, with, more often than not, members of the black bourgeoisie acting as hatchet men, any Negro who sought leadership over the black masses and refused to become a tool of the white power structure was either cast into prison, killed, hounded out of the country, or blasted into obscurity and isolation in his own land and among his own people. His isolation was assured by publicity boycotts, alternated with character assassination in the mass media, and by the fratricidal power plays of Uncle Toms, who control the Negro community on behalf of the white power structure. The classic illustrations of this squash, the black militant policy, are the careers of Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson. Garvey, who in the first quarter of this century sparked a black mass movement based in America, but international in scope and potential, was cast into federal prison and then exiled to England. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the intellectual giants of the modern world, was silenced and isolated in America as viciously and effectively as the racist regime in South Africa has silenced and isolated such leaders of the black masses as Chief Albert Luthuli, or as the British in Kenya once silenced and isolated Jomo Kenyatta. After attempts to cast him into prison on trumped-up charges had failed, Du Bois went into exile in Ghana and later renounced the bitter citizenship of the land of his birth. Paul Robeson was at the apex of an illustrious career as a singer and actor, earning over $200,000 a year, when he began speaking out passionately in behalf of his people, unable to balance the luxury of his own life with the squalor of the black masses from which he sprang and of which he was proud. The response of the black masses to his charisma alarmed both the Uncle Toms and the white power structure, and Paul Robeson was marked for destruction. Through a coordinated, sustained effort, Robeson became the object of economic boycott and character assassination. Broken financially and heartbroken to see black Uncle Toms working assiduously to defeat him and keep their own people down, Robeson's spirit was crushed, his health subverted, and his career destroyed. By crushing black leaders while inflating the images of Uncle Toms and celebrities from the apolitical world of sport and play, the mass media were able to channel and control the aspirations and goals of the black masses. The effect was to take the problem out of a political and economic and philosophical context and place it on the misty level of goodwill, charitable and harmonious race relations, and good sportsmanlike conduct. This technique of Negro control has been so effective that the best known Negroes in America have always been, and still are, the entertainers and athletes. This is true also of white America. The tradition is that whenever a crisis with racial overtones arises, an entertainer or athlete is trotted out and allowed to expound a predictable, conciliatory interpretation of what's happening. The mass media rush forward with grinding cameras and extended microphones, as though some great oracle were about to lay down a new covenant from God, when in reality, all that has happened is that the blacks have been sold out and cooled out again. One more time, boom! One more time, boom! When the question of segregation and the armed services arose during the 1940s, the then heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis, and Louis Satchmo Armstrong, who was also noted for blowing a trumpet, were more likely to be quoted on the subject than A. Philip Randolph or W.E.B. Du Bois. And more recently, at the peak of a nationwide epidemic of sit-ins and demonstrations, Attorney General Robert Kennedy called together a group of influential Negro entertainers and athletes to meet with him in secret, to get the message from the man and carry the gospel back to the restless natives. It actually seemed possible to this intelligent enforcer of the establishment will that Queen of the Mellow Mood, Lena Horne, and Harry Belafonte, quarterbacked by James Baldwin, were qualified, not to say willing, which they weren't, to say or do something to make the black and white hordes of insurgents freeze for a cooling off period. Obviously, the move made sense to Kennedy. It was worth trying, because Kennedy knew that it was based on a solid tradition which had worked for years. But times had changed fundamentally, and Kennedy's attempted cool-out was greeted with hoots of scorn and contempt from Negroes, entertainers and athletes included. Just as funny man Dick Gregory got himself shot trying to cool off revolting Negroes in Watts, the celebrities knew that their standing in the black community, which suddenly had become important to them, could easily be destroyed if the impression got out that they were cooperating in an Uncle Tom cool-out this late in the game. The stakes were growing higher, and Negroes everywhere were becoming eager and anxious to bet their lives against the status quo. The stupidity of the Uncle Tom cool-out reached perhaps its most grotesque incarnation when, after Negroes had rioted and burned in Harlem, the black friends of the white power structure issued a pamphlet with the headline, "Cool it, baby." But proof that the power structure never learns can be found in the ludicrous action of the wheels within wheels who rule Los Angeles. After the biggest, most violent Negro uprising since the Civil War, the burning of Watts, the blind, tradition-bound reactionaries of L.A. sought to placate the aroused Negro community by appointing John Roseboro, a baseball player, ace catcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, to the position of consultant on community relations, one of his tasks being to spread goodwill between Negroes and Chief Parker's police department. It is against this background of the traditional role of the Negro entertainer and athlete in racial crisis and the rebellion against that tradition that the Muhammad Ali-Floyd Patterson fight for the heavyweight championship must be viewed. The Muhammad Ali-Patterson fight. It is tempting to say that the Muhammad Ali-Floyd Patterson fight was an internal affair of the Negro people. But how could that be if it is true that both fighters in the boxing game itself, like everything else in America, are more or less owned and controlled by whites? The fight was ideologically a pivotal event, reflecting the consolidation of certain psychic gains of the Negro Revolution. However, the diplomatic fiction of the internal affair, no longer operative in international politics, is also inoperative here. Both black and white America, looking on, were sucked into the vortex of the event, feeling somehow a profound relationship to what was being enacted in that ring. They knew that a triumph and a defeat were taking place with consequences for America, transcending the fortunes of the two men squaring off in the ring to test their strength. The simplistic version of the fight bandied about in the press was that there was a white hope and a black hope riding on this fight. The white hope for a Patterson victory was, in essence, a counter-revolutionary desire to force the Negro, now in rebellion and personified in the boxing world by Ali, back into his place. The black hope, on the contrary, was to see Lazarus crushed, to see Uncle Tom defeated, to be given symbolic proof of the victory of the autonomous Negro over the subordinate Negro. The broad support for Muhammad Ali among Negroes has nothing to do with the black Muslims' racist ideology. Even the followers of the late beloved Malcolm X, many of whom despise Muhammad Ali for the scurvy remarks he made about the fallen Malcolm, nevertheless favored him over Patterson as the lesser of two evils, because Ali was more in harmony with the furious psychic stance of the Negro today, while Patterson was an anachronism, light years behind. In time of war, in the very center of the battle, the man of peace cannot command the ear of his people, and he loses ground to the man of war. The revolutionary rage in the black man's soul today, which boiled over and burned in Watts, means nothing if it doesn't mean business, and it was focused in cold, deadly hatred and contempt upon Floyd Patterson and the bootlicking art of the puppet in the style of his image. There is no doubt that white America will accept a black champion, applaud and reward him, as long as there is no white hope in sight. But what white America demands in her black champions is a brilliant, powerful body and a dull, bestial mind, a tiger in the ring and a pussycat outside the ring. It is a hollow, cruel mockery to crown a man king in the boxing ring and then shove him about outside, going so far as to burn a cross on his front doorstep, as whites did when Floyd Patterson tried to integrate a neighborhood. A man's home is his castle is a saying not meant for Negroes. A Negro's castle exists only in his mind, and for a black king of boxing, the boundaries of his kingdom are sharply circumscribed by the ropes around the ring. A slave in private life, a king in public. This is the life that every black champion has had to lead until the coming of Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is the first free black champion ever to confront white America. In the context of boxing, he is a genuine revolutionary, the black Fidel Castro of boxing. To the mind of white America and white black America, the heavyweight crown has fallen into enemy hands, usurped by a pretender to the throne. Muhammad Ali is conceived as occupying the heavyweight kingdom in the name of a dark alien power, in much the same way as Castro was conceived as a temporary interloper occupying Cuba. It made no difference that when Patterson announced that he would beat Ali and return the crown to America, Ali protested vigorously, asking, "What does he mean? I'm an American too." Floyd Patterson was the symbolic spearhead of a counter-revolutionary host, leader of the mythical legions of faithful darkies who inhabit the white imagination, whose assigned task it was to liberate the crown and restore it to its proper place in the free world. Muhammad Ali, in crushing the rabbit in 12, after punishing him at will, so there could be no doubt, so that the sports writers could not rob him of his victory on paper, inflicted a psychological chastisement on white America, similar in shock value to Fidel Castro's at the Bay of Pigs. If the Bay of Pigs can be seen as a straight right hand to the psychological jaw of white America, then Las Vegas was a perfect left hook to the gut. Essentially, every black champion until Muhammad Ali has been a puppet, manipulated by whites in his private life to control his public image. His role was to conceal the strings from which he was suspended, so as to appear autonomous and self-motivated before the public. But with the coming of Muhammad Ali, the puppet master was left with a handful of strings to which his dancing doll was no longer attached. For every white man, feeling himself superior to every black man, it was a serious blow to his self-image, because Muhammad Ali, by the very fact that he leads an autonomous private life, cannot fulfill the psychological needs of whites. The heavyweight champion is a symbol of masculinity to the American male, and a black champion, as long as he is firmly fettered in his private life, is a fallen lion at every white man's feet. Through a curious psychic mechanism, the puniest white man experiences himself as a giant killer, as a Superman, a great white hunter leading a gigantic ape. The black champion tamed by the white man around on a leash. But when the ape breaks away from the leash, beats with deadly fist upon his massive chest and starts talking to boot, proclaiming himself to be the greatest, spouting poetry, and annihilating every gun bearer the white hunter sicks on him, the white hunter not being disposed to crawl into the ring himself, a very serious slippage takes place in the white man's self-image, because that by which he defined himself no longer has a recognizable identity. If that black ape is a man, the white hunter asks himself, then what am I? It was really Sonny Liston who marked the coming of the autonomous Negro to boxing. But he was non-ideological, and so the scandal he caused could be handled, albeit with difficulty and pain. The mystique he exuded was that of a lone wolf who did not belong to his people or speak for them. He was for Liston and spoke only for Liston. And this was not out of harmony with the competitive ethic undergirding American culture. If every man is for himself, it was rational for Liston to be for himself. Although even this degree of autonomy in a Negro was bitterly resented, white America could tolerate it with less hysteria, with less of a sense of being threatened. But when the ideological Negro seized the heavyweight crown, no front of cool could conceal the ferocious emotional eruption in white America and among the embarrassed Uncle Toms, who were also experiencing an identity crisis. Yes, even old faithful Uncle Tom has a self-image. All men must have one, or they start seeing themselves as women. Women start seeing them as women. Then women lose their own self-image, and soon nobody knows what they are, themselves or what anyone else is. That is to say, the world starts looking precisely as it looks today. For there to be so deep an uproar over Muhammad Ali should indicate that there is something much more serious than a boxing title at stake, something cutting right to the center of the madness of our time. The New Testament parable of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead is interpreted by the black Muslims as a symbolic parallel to the history of the Negro in America. By capturing black men in Africa and bringing them to slavery in America, the white devils killed the black man, killed him mentally, culturally, spiritually, economically, politically, and morally, transforming him into a Negro. The symbolic Lazarus, left in the graveyard of segregation and second-class citizenship, and just as Jesus was summoned to the cave to raise Lazarus from the dead, Elijah Muhammad had been summoned by God to lift up the modern Lazarus, the Negro, from his grave. "Come out of her, my people," cries Elijah Muhammad. Cassius Clay, shedding his graveyard identity like an old dead skin, is one who heeded Elijah's call, repudiating the identity America gave him and taking on a new identity, Muhammad Ali. Floyd Patterson did not heed Elijah. The America out of which Elijah Muhammad calls his people is indeed doomed, crumbling, burning, if not by the hand of God, then by the hand of man. And this doomed America was partly buried in the boxing ring at Las Vegas when Muhammad Ali pounded a die-hard Lazarus into submission. With the America that is disappearing, the Lazarus man created in the crucible of its hatred and pain is also vanishing. The victory of Muhammad Ali over Floyd Patterson marks the victory of a new world over an old world, of life and light over Lazarus and the darkness of the grave. This America recreating itself out of its own ruins. The pain is mighty for every American, black or white, because the task is gigantic and by no means certain of fulfillment. But there are strong men in this land, and they will not be denied. Their task will not be ended until both Paul Bunyan and John Henry can look upon themselves and each other as men. The strength in the image of the one not being at the expense of the other. Harsh, brutal, and vicious though it may be, no one can deny Muhammad Ali his triumph. And though you comb the ghettos of your desperate cities and beat the bushes of your black belts for another puppet who will succeed where the rabbit failed, your search will be in vain, because even as you search, you yourself are being changed, and you will understand that you must continue to change or die. Yes, the Louisville Lip is a loudmouth braggart. Yes, he is a black Muslim racist, staunch enough in the need of his beliefs to divorce his wife for not adopting his religion, and firing his trainer, who taught him to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee for the same reason. But he is also a free man, determined not to be a white man's puppet, even though he fights to entertain them, determined to be autonomous in his private life and a true king of his realm in public. And he is exactly that. A racist black Muslim heavyweight champion is a bitter pill for racist white America to swallow. Swallow it, or throw the whole bit up, and hope that in the convulsions of your guts, America, you can vomit out the poisons of hate which have led you to a dead end in this valley of the shadow of death.